What if your blood held a song, not written by humans, but composed by something far older, far greater than anything we have ever imagined? What if deep within the earth, an ancient melody had been waiting hidden, unfinished, waiting for one child's voice to awaken it? Tonight, you will journey into the heart of that forgotten symphony, where life, death, and destiny are rewritten in vibrations that tear reality apart. What will you believe when the earth itself begins to sing? Are we truly alone, or have we always been part of a song written across the stars? Stay with us, and let the resonance unfold. In a forgotten fold of the world, where the nights breathed thick with mist and the land itself seemed to dream, a girl named Lina lived in a crumbling village that clung stubbornly to the bones of ancient hills. She was 10 years old, delicate and strange, her hair like spun ash and her eyes deep and unsettled, as if they reflected things no one else could see. Around her, the villagers moved with careful distance, whispering prayers under their breath when she passed, as if fearing that some old, sleeping thing within the earth might awaken if they dared stare too long. Inside her home, the oldest relic was not a family heirloom nor a sacred talisman, but a battered radio, scarred and rusted, abandoned on a crooked shelf like the carcass of a forgotten god. It had long since ceased to catch the human voice. Yet every night, without fail, it would shudder into life. From its broken speaker poured strange sounds, not music, not noise, but a cascade of murmurs stitched with patterns that no ear was ever meant to decipher. The signals were fractured, layered, otherworldly. They buzzed against the air like invisible wings brushing past, delicate yet charged with an invisible threat. When the first breath of those impossible sounds rose into the room, Lina would stir from her bed as if summoned. Barefoot, she would glide silently to the radio, her body moving like a sleeper lost between worlds. Sitting cross-legged before the machine, she would listen not with fear, but with a deep, aching familiarity, and then she would sing. Her voice did not mimic the sounds. It wove through them, around them, completing patterns half-formed in the static. It was a language not spoken but felt, a sequence of vibrations that made the old stones tremble imperceptibly in their foundations. The dust in the air twisted into unseen shapes, the shadows along the walls deepened unnaturally, thickening until they seemed almost sentient, leaning closer with every note. And the house, the old, cracked house, creaked as though a great weight had descended upon it, a pressure from above, or from somewhere far beyond the stars. Outside, dogs whimpered in their sleep, cattle stirred restlessly in the barns, and the thick woods that bordered the village seemed to grow darker, their trees crowding together as if to listen. Something watched from within the woods, something that did not belong to the flesh and blood world, but it did not dare approach. Not yet. In the village square, unseen by Lina, the ancient well stone, a relic older than the church, vibrated almost imperceptibly. Inside its core, dormant minerals began to resonate at the same strange frequencies that poured from Lina's throat. Beneath the village, in the veins of the earth no pickaxe had ever touched, the echoes of her voice traveled deeper and deeper, calling to things slumbering in the darkness, forgotten by time. Her mother, though she never spoke of it, felt the shift. She would sometimes find herself standing at the doorway in the dead of night, her hands trembling, unable to look away as her daughter sang. There was beauty in that sound, yes, an aching, impossible beauty, but wrapped within it was also danger, something too large, too vast, and too unknown for the human mind to hold without splintering. It was as if Lina were unraveling some ancient thread, pulling at it, loosening it from the tapestry of reality, thread by invisible thread. And yet Lina remained serene, her face illuminated by the dim ghost light of the moon, her small frame trembling slightly as if barely able to contain the power flowing through her. She sang of things she had never seen, vast gardens of light floating in black oceans, cities grown from crystal vines, rivers of liquid fire threading through sleeping planets. She sang of loneliness deeper than death and hope sharper than a blade. Her voice climbed higher, weaving into the fabric of the night itself until even the stars seemed to pulse with her rhythm. As the final notes faded, the silence that followed was wrong, heavy, expectant, like the moment before a great storm breaks. In the fields beyond the village, small orbs of faint light flickered briefly, winking out before any human eye could confirm their existence. In the woods, unseen shapes shifted with restless hunger. And above, hidden behind the peaceful stars, something vast stirred awake, opening a single colossal eye across the blackness of space, focusing with terrible precision on the fragile, trembling voice that had called it. Inside the little house, Lina lowered her head, exhausted but strangely at peace. The old radio gave a final crackle and fell silent. For tonight, the stars had heard. And they had remembered. But in the hidden depths where fear slithered unseen, something else had heard too. And it was beginning to move. The second night after the storm, the sky above Lina's village did not heal. Instead, it remained bruised, the stars smeared across it like faint scars, and the air hung with a restless static that made the skin prickle. The radio, that battered relic sleeping on its shelf, awoke again, but this time, not gently. It growled to life with a low, grinding hum that vibrated through the floorboards, rattling old jars and sending spiders scuttling back into the cracked walls. Lina, drawn as if by invisible strings, slid from her bed before even opening her eyes. The world around her had shifted subtly, the darkness felt heavier, almost sticky, clinging to her bare feet as she crossed the cold floor. Her heart thudded against her ribs, not with fear exactly, but with the fierce gravity of something vast unfolding, something so far beyond human comprehension that to even brush against its edge left the mind gasping for meaning. The radio's speaker twitched and spasmed, and then from its depths spilled a sound that defied the bones of the earth. It was not music at first, it was chaos, raw and jagged, like the tearing of cosmic fabric. Frequencies collided and collapsed, generating shapes that had no name, sound that was not meant for human ears. The air itself seemed to ripple, warping the wooden beams of the house, making the candle flames bend away as if recoiling from something unseen. And yet, Lina understood. Somewhere deep inside, she knew that buried within the chaos was a structure, a secret architecture, a cathedral of sound waiting to be revealed. She knelt before the radio, her small hands resting on her knees, her breathing slow and deliberate as the noise battered the fragile walls of reality. Her mouth opened without conscious thought, and once again she sang. At first, her voice trembled, a thin silver thread cast into the howling storm of frequencies. But as she sang, the chaos began to shift. The noises sharpened, converging around her notes like iron filings drawn to a hidden magnetic pattern. She was not following the sounds, she was shaping them, drawing the broken pieces into an order that had been waiting, sleeping, beneath the surface all along. The transformation was slow but terrible in its beauty. The frequencies coalesced into a melody that was impossibly complex yet achingly pure. It was a song without words, sung by the universe before time itself had names. It was the sound of stars breathing, of planets forming in the embrace of ancient fields of dust. It was the cry of cedars casting their harmony seeds across the void, weaving life where there was none. As Lina sang, the room changed around her. The walls seemed to soften, becoming almost translucent, revealing glimpses of other places, towering cities of glass and light, vast oceans under alien suns, fields where living vines reached hungrily toward the stars. The visions flickered at the edges of sight, vanishing whenever she tried to focus on them directly, but their emotional weight pressed into her chest until she could hardly breathe. The air turned colder, sharper, as if the village itself had been peeled back like old skin, exposing a raw, ancient landscape that had been buried beneath centuries of ignorance. Through the windows, the trees loomed unnaturally tall and twisted, their branches twitching against a wind that made no sound. Shadows scurried across the ground, things that had too many legs, or none at all, vanishing whenever she turned her head. Outside the house, the earth groaned. Tiny fractures splintered through the cobblestones of the village square, hairline cracks too small for ordinary eyes to notice, but growing steadily with every verse Lina sang. Deep underground, things long forgotten stirred in their stony tombs, resonating with the same impossible frequencies now flowing through Lina's voice. Her mother, watching from the threshold of the kitchen, gripped the doorframe so hard her knuckles turned bloodless. She wanted to call out, to pull her daughter back from whatever precipice she was tiptoeing along, but the words froze in her throat. She could feel it too, that terrible beauty, that hunger awakening in the world around them. It was as if the universe had cracked open just enough for something to slip through, and that something was listening now, learning the tune. Sweat trickled down Lina's forehead as her voice climbed higher, threading through keys and octaves not mapped by any earthly music. She could feel herself fraying at the edges, her body too small, too fragile to channel the immensity pouring through her. Yet she sang on, because she had to. Because somewhere beyond the stars, something ancient and immense had heard her, and it demanded to be answered. The melody reached its zenith, a soaring, heart-wrenching cascade of sound that made even the shadows recoil. For a moment, everything stood still, the trees, the winds, even the ticking of the old clock above the hearth. It was as if reality itself had paused, breathless, listening. Then, without warning, the radio emitted one last convulsive pulse of energy, so violent that the entire house shuddered. The glass in the windows spider-webbed into fine, weeping cracks. The lights blew out in a shower of blue sparks. The candle flames were snuffed as if crushed by an unseen hand. And in the suffocating blackness that followed, Lina collapsed forward, barely conscious, her last breath carrying a single note so pure it carved a wound into the night itself. Far above, beyond human sight, a signal surged outward from the village, an ancient beacon reactivated, calling to the hidden architects of the cosmos. Something vast and terrible heard, and this time, it was coming. In the days that followed the night of the fractured song, Lina's village grew heavier, as if draped in a shroud stitched from invisible threads of unease. The air was thicker, harder to breathe, and a strange tension hummed in the earth itself, a vibration too low for the ears but not for the bones. The old church bell cracked down its spine without warning, splitting the morning silence with a sound like a dying scream, and at night, the livestock refused to settle, their restless movements echoing through the dark fields like muted drums warning of some unseen march. It was during this shifting of the world that he arrived. Dr. Elias Kaelen, a man shaped more by obsession than by flesh, drove into the village in a battered white truck coated in the dust of endless roads. His eyes were sharp, fever-bright behind wire-rimmed glasses, and though he smiled when he spoke, it was the kind of smile that never touched the eyes, a smile built from desperation disguised as politeness. He came armed not with weapons, but with equipment, battered instruments, cases of sensors, devices that blinked with small green lights like trapped fireflies. He said he was a researcher of rare phenomena. He did not say what kind. He did not need to. His presence alone stirred the village's old fears, but the elders said nothing, as if sensing that resistance would be useless. Kaelen had heard of Lina, though no official channels had ever reported her existence. Rumors had traveled faster than any sanctioned transmission, whispering through broken ham radios, CB chatter, intercepted frequencies on weathered satellites. There were places in the world where people still knew to listen when something ancient stirred, and Kaelen had listened better than most. He had followed the echoes of her voice across tangled bands of static, across abandoned frequencies where no signal should have survived. When he arrived, he did not knock. He simply waited by the edge of the road, where the mist clung like breath to the stones, until Lina appeared. She came walking barefoot through the gray morning, her dress clinging to her small frame, her hair wild and damp from the mist. She did not look afraid. She looked inevitable, as if she had known this meeting was written long before either of them were born. Kaelen watched her approach, his heart hammering, not from excitement, but from a primal fear he dared not name, the same fear one feels standing too close to the edge of a great black pit, feeling something rise unseen toward you from below. He asked no permission. With a trembling hand, he lifted his recorder, a small battered thing that had survived storms, deserts, and worse, and pressed the worn button. "Sing," he whispered, though his voice cracked under the weight of the moment. Lina said nothing. She simply closed her eyes. And then, from her parted lips, poured a sound that was not meant for human ears. A keening melody, beautiful and terrible, that stretched and bent the very air around them. The trees at the edge of the village leaned away as if recoiling. The clouds twisted overhead, forming impossible shapes before dissolving back into formless gray. Kaelen stumbled backward, choking on sudden tears that welled up without warning. The sound ripped through his thoughts, bypassing logic, cutting straight into the raw, unshielded parts of his mind where old nightmares lived. He fell to his knees, gasping, as the melody built and built, weaving frequencies that sang of things too vast, too terrible to name, fields of stars devoured by darkness, civilizations rising and crumbling in endless cycles of sorrow and rebirth, voices crying out across the endless black, only to be swallowed by silence. But within the terrible beauty was structure, a delicate architecture hidden in the chaos, like a cathedral made entirely of sound. His mind, half mad, recognized it, mathematical patterns buried within the frequencies, sequences that could not occur naturally. They spoke of intent, of design, of a message not for the mind, but for the very bones, for the genetic memory embedded deep within every living thing on earth. With hands that shook so violently he could barely hold the device, Kaelen managed to record the last fragments of her song before it faded into the mist. Lina opened her eyes and stared at him, not accusing, not pleading, but with a terrible calm, as if she were only a vessel for something far older and far colder than compassion. Without a word, she turned and walked back toward the village, disappearing into the swirling mist that seemed to swallow her whole. Kaelen sat alone for a long time after, shivering uncontrollably, clutching the recorder to his chest like a talisman against madness. Above him, high in the poisoned sky, something shifted, a dark thread unraveling from a place beyond the stars, a tether now attached to him, to Lina, to the world itself. Something had noticed them. Something had heard the song. And it was coming. Dr. Kaelen did not sleep after his first encounter with Lina's voice. Sleep was a door he dared not open now, for he knew something waited on the other side, something vast and wordless, coiled in the dark folds of his mind, a shadow left by the frequencies he had heard. His hands moved feverishly, setting up crude lab equipment in the abandoned schoolhouse he had claimed as a makeshift base. The villagers gave the place wide berth. They no longer looked at him when they passed, their eyes sliding away as though from a man already half claimed by some invisible contagion. Inside the hollowed shell of the building, under flickering light bulbs that swung in the cold drafts like nooses, Kaelen worked. He extracted a blood sample from the scrap of cloth Lina had left behind. A trickle of blood caught on the hem of her dress, perhaps from a careless scratch, perhaps from something deeper. His instruments, old but faithful, whirred and clicked and whispered as they analyzed the fluid, feeding its secrets slowly onto dim screens. The results came in broken waves, fragments that Kaelen at first could not believe. The DNA was human, yes, but threaded through it, like veins of silver in stone, was something else. A sequence that did not fit. A sequence that pulsed with a rhythm, almost like a song. Kaelen leaned closer, heart hammering, his breath frosting the cold glass of the monitor. The sequence was not random. It repeated, complex and perfect, and as he translated the molecular patterns into sound frequencies, the blood began to sing back to him through the machine, whispering the same impossible melody Lina had sung into the mist. And then came the second discovery, the one that drove him back a step in primal fear. The pattern embedded in her DNA was identical to a signal captured by a defunct observatory in South America exactly 50 years ago, a signal recorded from the direction of Vega, a star system 25 light-years away. A signal that no one had ever decrypted. A signal that was not supposed to exist anymore, lost in bureaucratic silence and classified under projects whose names had been buried in closed rooms and erased from official memory. Kaelen's breath caught as the implications spiraled out like cracks in ice. Lina had not merely heard the signal, she was the signal. It lived in her blood, in her breath, in her very being. She was not simply singing the universe's music, she was built from it, grown from seeds sown across the cold gardens of space by something older than human history. The thought sickened him and thrilled him at once. It meant that human evolution, everything they thought they knew about it, was a lie stitched into their bones, a half-truth meant to conceal a deeper, more terrible design. It meant that life on Earth might not be an accident or a divine miracle, but an experiment, a cultivation from afar. The cedars had planted their music, and Earth had bloomed, unaware that it danced not to its own song, but to an alien symphony written in forgotten stars. As Kaelen sat staring into the unblinking eye of the monitor, the air around him seemed to grow heavier, thicker, charged with an unseen electricity that tasted of metal and old stone. The lights dimmed, then flared too bright, casting monstrous shadows against the walls. Outside, the wind had picked up, howling down the broken streets like a voice grown hoarse from a million years of silence. The radio crackled from the corner where he had abandoned it, and a sound slithered out, not a transmission, but a breathing, a slow and rhythmic inhalation and exhalation, as if something vast and unseen were leaning closer to the fragile walls of the schoolhouse, tasting the air for signs of life. Kaelen froze, his heart a trapped bird inside his chest. He knew instinctively that analyzing Lina's DNA had not gone unnoticed. The pattern embedded within her blood was not a relic. It was active. It was aware. And now, so were they. He stumbled backward, knocking over a tray of glass slides that shattered like ice across the floor. The sound barely registered over the rising hum vibrating through the ground beneath his feet, a low, resonant frequency that shook the old beams and made the walls bleed dust. The frequency was growing, calling out, resonating with something deep underground, something buried long before the first stone of the village had ever been laid. Kaelen fled the lab with only his recorder and a handful of scribbled notes, the chilling realization gnawing at the back of his mind: Lina was not an anomaly. She was a beacon. A key. A message encoded into flesh, sent to awaken things humanity was never meant to disturb. Behind him, the schoolhouse groaned under the unseen pressure, and somewhere deep below the earth, something cracked open. The cedars were listening. And now, they were beginning to answer. The night after Kaelen fled the schoolhouse, the village seemed to sink deeper into a silence that was no longer natural. It was a silence weighted with expectation, thick and oppressive, as if the very air had become a membrane stretched too thin, quivering with the slightest breath. The stars above were veiled behind a skin of clouds that did not move, frozen in the sky like the closed eyes of ancient gods. Even the animals, those early warners of unseen danger, had abandoned their cries. It was as if the entire living world was holding its breath, waiting for something inevitable to arrive. Kaelen hid in the cramped attic of an abandoned rectory, his equipment spread chaotically around him, wires snaking across the rotted wooden floor like nervous veins. He replayed the recording from Lina's blood, over and over, not daring to stop even as it began to erode the edges of his sanity. Each time the melody unfurled through the speakers, he caught new shapes within it, layers of frequencies interwoven like strands of DNA, forming what was unmistakably a message, an intelligence etched into pure vibration. But it was not just the sound. It was the effect. Every time the signal played, reality itself seemed to fray at the edges. Lights flickered not from power surges, but from something deeper, as though the fundamental rules holding the physical world together were buckling under the pressure of recognition. The floorboards shivered. The glass of the broken windows sweated with fine mist even though the night outside was dry and cold. Kaelen understood with growing horror that the signal was not meant only to be heard. It was meant to be felt, to be absorbed into the flesh and bone of the listener, to awaken dormant structures sleeping inside human cells. And the awakening had begun. The signal, it seemed, was an echo, one of many. A breadcrumb left in the genetic paths of thousands, perhaps millions, scattered across the world, awaiting the right conditions to resonate back to the source. It was not a call for communication. It was a test. Kaelen pieced together the hidden logs he had scavenged from old research papers, classified radio intercepts, and corrupted satellite archives. A picture emerged, fragmented but unmistakable. 50 years ago, the original broadcast from Vega had arrived, a pulse of structured frequencies designed to infiltrate organic matter, specifically human DNA, and insert a dormant pattern. It was not an invasion in the traditional sense. It was an infection of potential. A seeding of future awakening. Only a handful of individuals would ever harmonize with the full sequence. And once they did, once their resonance matched, they would become something else. Kaelen's breath rattled in his throat as he realized the scale of it. Humanity was not alone, not merely in the cosmic sense, but within themselves. They were carriers, vessels shaped by forces they had never understood, singing back across the abyss of space like children calling out to ancient, unknowable parents. And those parents were listening. The radio beside him crackled violently, its dial spinning madly on its own as if searching for a frequency that could no longer be contained. A sound burst from it, not the familiar melody, but a sharp, slicing shriek, like metal tearing through bone. Kaelen recoiled, pressing his hands to his ears as the shriek vibrated through his skull. It was a warning. Or a summons. The ground beneath the rectory gave a low, grinding moan. Dust fell from the rafters like gray snow. Outside, in the ruined village square, the cracked stones around the ancient well began to pulse with a dull, sickly light. Shapes moved in the mist, half-formed and writhing, as if the air itself had grown fingers and was reaching, searching. Kaelen scrambled to gather his notes, his recorder, anything he could salvage. He knew he had little time. Somewhere beyond the hills, vehicles rumbled through the darkness, black jeeps without lights, government insignia scrubbed clean, carrying men who had been watching, waiting for the day the signal would activate. They were not coming to study Lina. They were coming to erase her and anyone who had heard the song. And far beyond them, beyond the atmosphere itself, something older stirred in the icy gulfs between stars. It was not warm, it was not merciful. It was vast and patient and terrible, moving now along the invisible lines of the ancient song, following the echoes back to their source with a hunger that no human prayer could satisfy. Kaelen slipped into the night, clutching the recorder like a dying ember of forbidden knowledge, knowing that the window was closing. He had to reach Lina. He had to protect her. Because if they silenced her now, humanity would never understand what it was meant to become or what price had been placed on its existence. Behind him, the well in the village square split open with a deafening crack, releasing a gust of black mist that shrieked with 1,000 silent voices. The cedars had heard their children's call. And they were answering. The truck Kaelen had stolen rumbled over the broken roads like a wounded beast, its frame shuddering with every pothole and crack. The night was a deep, churning black, thicker than ink, the sky above hidden beneath a solid ceiling of cloud that pressed low and oppressive against the world, as if trying to smother the earth itself. His hands, tied around the steering wheel, trembled not from the cold but from the certainty that something unseen was pacing him in the darkness beyond the flickering headlights. Every so often, a shape would loom at the edges of his vision, a figure too tall, too still, and when he turned his head, it would vanish, leaving only the dying echo of static hissing through the battered radio on the dashboard. He had no illusions about escape. Not from them. Not anymore. But he still had a chance to reach Lina, to piece together enough of the truth before the full weight of the silent war crushing the world around them fell like a final hammer blow. He needed answers, and to find them, he had to start where the deception had begun, at the site of the first forgotten broadcast. The old observatory was nearly gone now, a rotting skeleton of iron and stone perched atop a desolate ridge where the wind never stopped moaning. Built in the 1960s to listen for whispers from the stars, it had fallen into ruin after a mysterious fire gutted the research wing in 1977. Official reports cited equipment malfunction, but those who had survived spoke only in riddles, if they spoke at all. Kaelen had grown up chasing the myths surrounding this place, but now, driving toward its remains with the signal burning through his mind, he realized how much even the myths had been sanitized. He parked the truck beneath a stand of dead trees, the ground littered with brittle leaves that crumbled underfoot like ancient parchment. The observatory loomed above him, its rusted dish tilted toward the cloud-swathed heavens like a blind eye pleading for mercy. The air was colder here, colder than it should have been, and every breath Kaelen drew into his lungs felt dense with particles too small to see, too heavy to ignore, as if the very molecules of this place remembered what had happened and refused to let go. Inside, the silence was a living thing. It pressed against Kaelen's ears until he could hear the frantic rhythm of his own heart thundering louder than any footstep. The walls were scorched black, etched with deep gouges that spoke of violence not wrought by fire alone. Equipment lay scattered across the floor, ancient computers with screens spider-webbed by cracks, keyboards missing keys that had been torn away in desperation. The smell of burnt ozone and old dust clung to everything. At the center of the main chamber, Kaelen found what he was looking for, a terminal so ancient it should not have been capable of holding a charge, yet when he brushed aside the debris and pressed the blinking, cracked power button, the monitor flickered to life with a reluctant whine, displaying a single line of blinking text, Vega_1975_broadcast.log. His hands shook as he navigated the broken interface, bypassing corrupted files and fragmented directories until he unearthed the recording, buried deep under layers of false data, camouflaged to look like mundane noise to anyone who did not know how to dig. He pressed play. At first, there was only static, a harsh, grating wall of white noise that clawed at the nerves like invisible fingers. But then, beneath it, so faint it was almost a hallucination, came the melody. The same melody Lina had sung. The same impossible architecture, hidden in layers, building and building until Kaelen realized he was no longer just hearing it, he was inside it. The walls of the observatory seemed to breathe with the music, expanding and contracting in time with an alien pulse. Images flooded his mind, visions of colossal seed ships drifting through black oceans of nothingness, their hulls alive with fractal patterns, scattering packets of encoded life across barren worlds, visions of creatures not made of flesh but of light and sound, folding themselves into geometric symphonies that birthed galaxies as easily as breathing. And amid it all, a singular truth carved itself into his bones: humanity had not been created. Humanity had been composed. He barely registered the click of boots on stone until it was almost too late. Kaelen turned, heart hammering, to see figures emerging from the mist, men in black, faces hidden behind featureless masks that gleamed dully in the flickering light. Their rifles were slung low, relaxed but ready, the posture of men who had done this countless times and would not hesitate now. They moved with a precision that spoke of training honed not in wars of nations, but in wars of silence, wars fought in shadows and erased from memory. One of them raised a hand. No need for words. Kaelen understood. He was not meant to leave this place. Desperation lent him speed. He ripped the recorder from the terminal, clutching it to his chest like a dying ember of truth, and bolted through the ruined corridors, the sounds of pursuit erupting behind him like thunder. Bullets whined past his ears, snapping chunks of stone and twisted metal into the air. The observatory groaned around them, the ancient structure weeping dust from its bones as if mourning what was about to happen. He plunged into the woods, thorns tearing at his clothes, branches clawing his face, the cold air slicing his lungs raw. He did not look back. He did not need to. He could feel them gaining, inevitable as the ending of a song. And above, behind the clouds, something else watched. Something that had seeded the first note into Earth's bloodlines had heard the broadcast again, after half a century of silence. Something that was coming to finish what it had begun. Kaelen ran until the forest devoured the last trace of civilization, until the mechanical rhythm of boots pounding behind him faded into the heavy breathing of the earth itself. Branches lashed at him like the blind hands of ancient statues crumbling into dust, roots twisted underfoot with malicious intent, and all around him, the mist thickened into walls, shrouding the world in a silence so absolute that even his frantic heartbeat seemed an intrusion. He stumbled, fell, rose again, driven not by hope but by the cold certainty that to stop moving was to cease existing entirely. When at last he collapsed, chest heaving, sweat chilling on his skin, he found himself in a clearing unlike any he had seen before. The trees here were wrong, too tall, too thin, their bark shimmering faintly with iridescent patterns that shifted like slow, dreaming serpents. The ground underfoot pulsed subtly, as though the earth itself were breathing beneath a skin of moss and stone. Above, the mist parted just enough to reveal a jagged sliver of sky, and in that gap, the stars wheeled madly, as if viewed from a world where the laws of physics had been rewritten. In the center of the clearing stood a stone monolith, its surface inscribed with symbols that seemed to writhe and rearrange themselves when Kaelen tried to focus on them. The structure was old beyond reckoning, carved not by human hands but by something that understood not only the geometry of matter but the deeper symmetries of existence itself. And as he stared, trembling, realization bloomed in his mind like a dark flower: this was not a monument. It was a marker. A seedling. A receiver. The seeders of the void had been here. He dropped to his knees, overcome by a sudden flood of images that poured into his mind, not as thoughts, but as memories so ancient they seemed to belong to the earth itself. He saw them beings of impossible form, neither flesh nor machine, drifting through the cold tides of interstellar darkness. They were older than time as humans understood it, architects of life who sowed songs into the dust of barren worlds, nurturing the rise of consciousness like careful gardeners. But they were not gods. They were not saviors. They were engineers, patient and detached, and humanity was nothing more than one project among countless others scattered across the void. The cedars had no faces, no eyes, but Kaelen felt their attention nonetheless, like the slow turning of a distant planet's gravity well, immense and indifferent. They sang their codes into the primordial chaos of the cosmos, not out of love, but out of necessity, a cycle of creation and collapse written into the fabric of reality. Worlds bloomed and withered under their influence, civilizations rose to the precipice of understanding and then crumbled into dust when they failed to ascend. But sometimes, very rarely, a species sang back. And now, with Lina's voice as the catalyst, humanity had sung. The monolith pulsed once, a soft throb of light rippling down its ancient surface, and from somewhere deep within the ground, a resonance answered a low, mournful hum that Kaelen felt vibrating through his teeth, his bones, his blood. It was a summons. A signal confirming that the seed planted so long ago had finally taken root, that the harvest could now begin. Kaelen staggered to his feet, every instinct screaming at him to flee, but there was nowhere left to run. The cedars had marked this world, and through Lina, they had called to it once more. The mist around the clearing thickened, coalescing into shapes that hinted at terrible forms, vast structures of sound and light folding in dimensions human minds were never meant to perceive. For a moment, Kaelen glimpsed them fully, towers of living crystal arching into alien skies, seas of black glass pulsing with 1,000 nameless songs, the broken ruins of other worlds that had dared to reach beyond their cradle and had been found wanting. In the heart of this revelation, Kaelen understood the full horror. The cedars had never truly left. They were not distant observers, they were the silent architects of every anomaly, every whisper of the impossible that had bled into human myths and nightmares for millennia. They were here, now, listening. And they were not alone. Something else moved in the wake of the cedars, a darker current, a contamination of the original plan, a predator that fed not on life, but on potential, devouring entire worlds before their songs could be completed. Kaelen felt its attention brush against him, a caress colder than death, and he knew then that the awakening of Lina's voice had not only called the gardeners. It had also called the scavengers. Humanity stood balanced on the knife edge between ascension and annihilation, and the weight of that choice now rested in the hands of a child who had never asked to bear it. As Kaelen staggered back into the mist, clutching the burning knowledge in his heart, the monolith pulsed again, brighter this time, sending a ripple through the fabric of the clearing, through the world, through the stars. The cedars had heard. The scavengers had smelled blood. And the true harvest was about to begin. The night Lina awakened was unlike any night the earth had ever known. Across the forgotten village, the sky collapsed inward, not with storms or thunder, but with a silence so deep it crushed the breath from the lungs of every living thing. The clouds, thick and glowering, twisted above like the coils of some sleeping beast stirring at last, and from beyond them came a low vibration, a hum that was not a sound but a feeling, a resonance that plucked at the nerves and the marrow, awakening instincts older than the memory of fire. Lina stood alone in the center of the ancient well, her bare feet resting on the cold, cracked stones that pulsed faintly with an inner light. She wore a simple white dress, now grayed with the dust of a world trying desperately to deny what was coming. Her hair hung limp and dark around her face, her hands limp at her sides, but her eyes shone with a terrible clarity, reflecting not the moon or the stars, but the distant fires of other worlds. The village had emptied without a word. Doors hung open, curtains fluttered in windows like abandoned flags, and the last remnants of human habitation had melted away before the rising tide of whatever force now surrounded the girl. Even the animals had vanished, their instincts warning them in ways no words ever could. Only Kaelen remained, hidden in the ruined churchyard, heart hammering like a trapped bird, every instinct screaming at him to flee even as something deeper rooted him to the spot, forcing him to witness what no man was meant to see. The first note rose from Lina's lips not as a sound but as a ripple through existence itself. The stones of the well shivered, the trees at the edge of the clearing bent as though bowing before some unseen monarch. Above, the clouds recoiled, pulling back like a curtain to reveal not stars, but something older, a vast tapestry of blackness threaded with veins of cold fire, a glimpse into the architecture of the void itself. As Lina sang, the ground cracked open around her, hairline fractures at first, spider webbing outward with every note until the very earth seemed to bleed light from unseen wounds. The air thickened, heavy with particles too small to name, vibrating with each frequency Lina released into the world. She was not singing words, nor even a melody in any human sense. She was unlocking something, unwinding the fabric of reality with the music encoded in her blood, notes that had waited eons for this moment of release. Kaelen gasped as visions flooded his mind, not hallucinations, but raw memories carried in the resonances pouring from Lina's voice. He saw oceans of black glass shatter into rivers of stars, towers of crystalline cities crumble into dust, seeds of pure light scattering across the void to land on barren planets where life would struggle, rise, and fall. He saw the seeders, no longer vague specters, but towering figures of shifting form, weaving songs that bent time and matter into new creations, their motives alien beyond comprehension. And he saw the scavengers. They came on wings of rusted metal and broken promises, things born not to create but to consume, to devour the symphonies before they could be completed, to erase the music from the cosmos one unfinished verse at a time. They had already found Earth. They were already coming. Lina's voice rose higher, the very air vibrating so violently that dust and stones lifted from the ground, suspended in a trembling dance around her. Blood dripped from Kaelen's nose, from his ears, from the cracks opening in his fingertips, but he could not look away. This was no longer a human girl standing in the well. This was a conduit, a living beacon flaring against the darkness, a declaration that the earth's song would not die without being heard. In the villages and cities far beyond the hills, strange phenomena erupted without warning. Lights in the sky spiraled and danced, electronic devices flickered with alien code, oceans pulled away from shores as if bowing to a greater tide. People across continents woke screaming from dreams they could not remember but whose terror clung to them like wet smoke. Governments scrambled in blind panic, their instruments useless against something that did not obey the laws of flesh and steel. And deep in the blackness between the stars, vast shapes turned their attention fully toward the tiny blue world. The seeders had heard the call. The scavengers had scented the blood. The first harvest was beginning. Lina's body trembled under the force of the awakening, her voice faltering, straining against the limits of her fragile human form. The fractures in the earth widened, spewing out gouts of white mist that coiled into the shapes of half-forgotten architectures, towers that had once stood on ancient continents now lost beneath the sea, vessels that had drifted into legend as fallen stars, songs that had once shaped the first dreams of mankind. Kaelen staggered forward without knowing why, drawn by the gravity of the moment, by the terrible beauty of the truth made flesh. He reached the edge of the well just as Lina collapsed, the final note escaping her in a single, pure tone so bright and cold it seemed to carve a wound across the night sky itself. The light faded. The earth sighed. And for a moment, there was silence so complete that it seemed the universe itself had paused to listen. Then, from the gaping cracks in the earth, from the skies now bleeding strange colors, from the cold black waters of distant seas, they came the echoes of 100 forgotten songs, rising to join Lina's, answering the call across every corner of the earth. The awakening had begun. And no power in heaven or hell would be able to silence it now. The awakening spread across the world like a slow, inevitable tide, and with it came fear. Governments scrambled to comprehend the impossible, their instruments overwhelmed by signals that bled across every known frequency, invading satellites, shattering secure channels, bypassing firewalls as if the very concept of barriers was meaningless. At first, they thought it was an attack of foreign power, a rogue artificial intelligence, something comprehensible within the familiar bounds of human conflict. But as the hours dragged into days, as reports flooded in of spontaneous blackouts, of strange phenomena twisting the fabric of normal life, of people collapsing under the unbearable pressure of dreams they could not wake from, the truth became undeniable: this was not a human-made event. The old organizations, the ones whose existence was denied even to presidents and kings, stirred from their hidden bunkers. Their agents moved silently through cities and towns, black vans with unmarked plates appearing at the edges of communities touched by the signal, sweeping up anyone whose DNA resonated too closely with the forbidden melody. Facilities long thought abandoned roared back to life, deep underground, where the air was filtered through miles of stone and the walls were thick enough to muffle even the cries of the desperate. At the center of it all, a name began to echo in the corridors of power: Lina. They had intercepted fragments of the ancient broadcast, decoded snatches of her song, enough to understand that she was not merely reacting to the awakening, she was amplifying it. Somehow, the girl had become a nexus, a living transmitter boosting the cedar song across the planet, awakening echoes buried in the human genome that had lain dormant for millennia. And where echoes awakened, control slipped away. To the minds that ruled from the shadows, this was unacceptable. The order was simple and absolute: retrieve the girl alive if possible, silence her if not. Kaelen knew they were coming. He felt it not just in the distant thrum of helicopter blades against the misty sky, not just in the cold vibration of satellite sweeps searching for heat signatures across the ravaged forests, but in the way the earth itself recoiled, the way the air tasted of static and iron and old blood. These were not soldiers he could reason with, not men and women who would hesitate at the sight of a child. They were caretakers of the old systems, guardians of a reality built on lies too fragile to survive a new song. He clutched Lina close as they fled through the ruins of forgotten villages, where houses leaned like broken teeth and roads dissolved into trails of ash. Lina did not speak. She was burning from within, her skin fever bright, her eyes reflecting visions Kaelen could only glimpse at the edges of sanity, cities singing themselves into being, oceans rising in symphonic tides, stars bleeding from wounds torn by songs too powerful to be contained. Each time Lina stumbled, the ground itself seemed to tremble in protest. Where her bare feet touched the earth, flowers bloomed briefly and withered into ash, the energy coursing through her too pure, too raw for a world still shackled to entropy. She was no longer entirely human, she was becoming something else, something Kaelen could barely comprehend, something he feared even as he knew he must protect. From the hills above, the first strike came, a sleek black drone, silent and invisible to any technology still tied to old world physics. It unleashed a weapon not of bullets but of sound, a counter-frequency designed to disrupt the resonance Lina carried. The blast hit the ground nearby, warping the air, shattering trees into splinters, and sending Kaelen sprawling. His ears bled, his vision blurred, but even through the agony he saw Lina stagger upright, her voice rising instinctively in answer. The counter-signal faltered, collapsed, overwhelmed by the purity of the Cedar's code woven into Lina's song. The drone spiraled out of the sky like a wounded bird, crashing into the trees with a blossom of black flame. But Kaelen knew more would come. Many more. He half carried, half dragged Lina through the forest, every step a battle against the collapsing world around them. Ash rained from the sky like snow. Rivers ran backward. Gravity shifted in pulses, making the earth tilt sickeningly underfoot. The awakening was accelerating, tearing at the seams of everything humanity had thought immutable. And still the black vans rolled closer. Still the agents moved in, their weapons not designed to kill but to erase, to burn the anomaly from the world before it could become unstoppable. Kaelen could feel the moment closing, in the moment when the choice would no longer be flight, but stand and fight, or fall into oblivion. Above, beyond the reach of human eyes, something vast and terrible slid closer across the void. The Cedars had not come alone. Behind them came others, ancient scavengers drawn by the smell of new life struggling into bloom, predators who would consume the song before it could reach maturity. In the end, Kaelen realized, it was not just Lina's survival at stake. It was the survival of the human soul itself. Kaelen stumbled through the night, the broken world bleeding around him, carrying Lina in his arms as if she weighed nothing, though the truth was heavier than any burden he had ever known. The trees pressed close, their skeletal branches scraping against him like grasping fingers, and the mist thickened until it felt like wading through a dream stitched together from fear and half-remembered prayers. Each breath burned in his lungs, heavy with the metallic taste of ozone and something older, something that tasted of stardust and forgotten oceans. Lina's body radiated an almost unbearable heat, yet her skin remained cold to the touch. Her eyes fluttered open and closed, glowing faintly in the darkness, as though tiny stars had been trapped beneath her eyelids. She was changing. He could feel it not just in her but in the very fabric of the world around her, a low, thrumming resonance that vibrated through the ground, through the trees, through the hollow spaces inside his own chest. They reached the remains of an old railway tunnel, half collapsed, its mouth gaping open like the maw of some ancient creature too tired to rise but too dangerous to ignore. Here, Kaelen set Lina down, shielding her with his own body as distant searchlights swept across the forest, their beams slicing through the mist like blades. He knew it was only a matter of time before they found them, but there was no strength left to run further. And somewhere deep within, he realized that running had never truly been an option. As he held her, Lina stirred, her lips moving in a whisper too soft for human ears. But Kaelen heard it not with his ears, but with the part of his mind now permanently altered by the cedar's song. The melody flowed into him, a fragile thread weaving through the ruins of his fear, pulling him toward a truth so vast it could not be contained by reason or language. The song was not merely a transmission. It was a map. Layered within the melody, hidden beneath the harmonics and counterpoints, was a structure, a blueprint encoded not in words but in frequencies designed to awaken latent potentials inside the human genome. It was a key, meticulously crafted, capable of unlocking the buried architecture seeded into mankind at the dawn of its creation. Humanity was not the end product. Humanity was an unfinished chord, waiting for the right trigger to complete its resonance. And Lina was the trigger. Kaelen gasped as the realization struck him with the force of a tidal wave. Lina was singing not to call the cedars but to call the next evolution of humanity itself. Her voice was awakening dormant pathways in those who could hear it, rewriting the very foundations of human existence at the molecular level. But change at that scale came with a cost. It meant the destruction of everything that had come before, the end of nations, of systems, of certainties. It meant chaos. Rebirth always demanded the death of the old. The agents chasing them were not simply trying to contain a biological anomaly. They were trying to prevent an evolutionary leap that would render their power meaningless, their empires obsolete. Kaelen staggered to his feet, staring into the darkness beyond the tunnel mouth, where figures moved like wraiths between the trees, drawing closer. He felt the decision hardening within him, a painful, inevitable clarity. He could not save the world from the song. He could only choose whether to protect the future being born, or to stand with the dying past. Beside him, Lina's voice rose again, stronger now, the notes vibrating through the stones, the earth, the very air, lifting tiny motes of dust into patterns that briefly formed impossible geometries before dissolving into the night. Her skin glowed with a faint silver light, threads of energy weaving around her like a cocoon spun from the breath of stars. The first bullet struck the tunnel mouth with a sharp crack, sending a spray of shattered stone into the air. The scavenger agents had arrived, moving with cold precision, weapons raised, faces hidden behind masks that had never known mercy. Kaelen threw himself in front of Lina instinctively, shielding her with his body, but the girl no longer needed protection. As the bullets flew, Lina stood, her tiny frame impossibly steady, her arms outstretched. She sang not words, but pure resonance, a song that tore through the air like a living force. The sound struck the agents with the weight of a collapsing star. They staggered, dropped their weapons, clutched at their heads, their bodies writhing as the frequencies unraveled the old code written into their flesh. Kaelen watched, heart in his throat, as the men fell one by one, not dead, but changed, their bodies trembling, their eyes wide with terror and awe as the new song rewrote the rules they had been born into. Above the shattered forest, the night sky cracked open. Not with thunder, not with light, but with music. A chorus of voices, ancient and newborn, rose from the earth, the seas, the stars themselves, answering Lina's call. The cedars had not abandoned their children. They had been waiting, watching, for the day the final note would be sung and the world would be ready to ascend or to fall. Kaelen fell to his knees, overcome by the beauty and the terror of it, the knowledge that history itself was ending, that something new, something terrible and magnificent, was beginning to stir in the bones of the earth. And at the heart of it all, Lina sang, her voice carrying the weight of forgotten eons, the hope of unborn civilizations, and the cold, undeniable truth that change, once awakened, could never be silenced again. The world did not break all at once. It shattered slowly, along fractures that had been there since the beginning, hidden beneath the illusion of permanence. Lina and Kaelen moved through the ruins of the old systems, across landscapes twisted by the awakening, where cities stood hollow and buzzing with ghost frequencies, and where the stars above seemed to pulse in rhythm with a heartbeat too vast to belong to any living creature. They found shelter in the hollow carcass of an ancient library, its marble floors cracked and buckling, its shelves gutted by time and fire. Dust hung heavy in the air, carrying the faint smell of old paper and something sweeter, almost metallic, the scent of change fermenting in the hidden places of the earth. Lina sat in the center of the ruined hall, her hands resting lightly on the cracked tiles, her head bowed as if listening to a voice too subtle for mortal ears. Kaelen crouched nearby, watching, guarding, feeling the rising pulse of something vast and terrible coiling around them like a storm gathering breath. He had seen it in her eyes, the transformation was accelerating. Lina was no longer merely a conduit. She was becoming a cipher, a living equation solving itself against the stubborn variables of reality. And tonight, something inside her had shifted again. Without warning, the air in the hall thickened, congealing into vibrating sheets of pressure that distorted the light and made breathing an act of pure will. The ancient stone beneath Lina's fingertips began to hum, faint at first, then louder, until the entire floor seemed to resonate with a frequency that did not belong to the physical world. Patterns emerged in the dust spirals, fractal geometries, sigils too complex for the human eye to fully decipher, markings older than any written language, older than thought itself. Kaelen's heart hammered against his ribs as Lina's body lifted slightly off the ground, suspended by unseen forces, her hair lifting as if underwater. She began to sing again, but this time the notes were sharper, more intricate, weaving layers upon layers of sound that folded into each other, collapsing and expanding with a rhythm that spoke of dimensions just beyond the veil of human understanding. He heard words without hearing them, saw visions without seeing them, great cities of gold and stone rising under alien skies, oceans of sentient water swirling in thought patterns too vast for speech, beings of light and gravity crafting songs that shaped planets like potters shaping clay. He saw humanity's true history, not as masters of their own destiny, but as heirs to a forgotten experiment, a symphony interrupted, a species seeded with potential and then abandoned to chaos. The code hidden within Lina's song was unlocking not just knowledge but memory. Human memory. Collective, primal, encoded into DNA by the seeders themselves. Lina's awakening was tearing down the walls erected to keep that knowledge buried, and in doing so, she was resurrecting the oldest dreams and the oldest nightmares. The ground beneath them cracked open in a silent scream, revealing caverns lined with crystalline growths that pulsed in answer to Lina's song. From deep within the earth, things began to stir, echoes of civilizations swallowed by time, fragments of consciousness reaching up like drowning hands from beneath the surface of history. Kaelen fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the tide of it. He saw flashes of other awakenings, on other worlds, where the song had risen too soon or too late, where entire species had been devoured by the scavengers before they could ascend. He saw that Earth's time was perilously short. The seeders had given humanity the seed of greatness, but it had always been a race against entropy, against predation, against the silent erasure that awaited all who failed to complete the song. Lina's voice climbed higher, a pure, agonizing note that shattered the last remnants of the physical shell binding the library together. The roof buckled, the marble columns cracked, and the stars above seemed to lean closer, their cold fire burning brighter in anticipation. In that moment, Kaelen understood, Lina's song was not simply a beacon. It was a key. Every frequency she unlocked awakened another piece of the ancient design hidden within humanity, a design meant to reshape not just bodies but minds, to elevate thought beyond the petty squabbles of tribes and empires, to awaken a species that could one day sing its own worlds into being. But if Lina failed, if the song was interrupted, corrupted, silenced, then humanity would not merely fall. It would be consumed, repurposed into raw material for the scavengers prowling the edges of awakening worlds. The black vans were coming again. He could feel them, even before the distant rumble of their engines tore through the misty night. They would bring more than bullets this time. They would bring silence. Instruments tuned to suppress, to erase, to crush the frequencies before they could complete their final, terrible bloom. Kaelen rose, blood roaring in his ears, heart hammering with fear and fury and something deeper, a resolve shaped not by logic but by the ancient, half-forgotten call to protect the song at all costs. He knew the path ahead would be narrow and bloodied. But he also knew, without doubt, that the future of the world now sang through Lina's fragile body, and he could not allow it to be silenced. As the stars above shimmered and whispered, and the earth below trembled with awakening dreams, Kaelen took Lina's hand, feeling the low, thrumming resonance pulsing through her skin into his bones, and together, they stepped into the collapsing world to finish the song that had been waiting since the beginning of time. The land itself seemed to protest their passage. As Lina and Kaelen moved deeper into the heart of the ruined world, the earth cracked and shuddered beneath their feet, the sky churned in slow, grinding spirals, and the air grew heavy with the taste of burnt metal and something sweeter, something older, something like the scent of stars dying in distant corners of the universe. Every step forward felt like tearing through invisible membranes, pushing through layers of reality stretched too thin, where time no longer flowed cleanly but eddied and collapsed in confused spirals. Lina walked ahead of Kaelen, her body moving with a strange, dreamlike grace, her bare feet leaving behind faint, luminous footprints that shimmered for a moment before fading into the cracked soil. She no longer seemed entirely anchored to the earth, she drifted slightly with every movement, as though gravity itself was reluctant to lay claim to her. The song within her had grown too strong, too deep, and now it resonated outward with every breath she took, a slow, building thrum that bent the world around her like heat distorting the horizon. They passed through a forest where the trees had fused into a single, writhing mass of living wood, their branches entwined in impossible knots that pulsed faintly with bioluminescent veins. Strange creatures slithered and darted through the shadows, things with too many eyes, too many wings, remnants of a biology being rewritten by the awakening. The air was thick with whispers, not in any language Kaelen could understand, but carrying meanings too vast, too sorrowful to be contained in words, a mourning for what was ending, a trembling hope for what might come. Ahead of them, the ground rose into a jagged hill, crowned by a structure that was not built but grown, an ancient receiver left by the cedars long before human hands had touched the soil. It was a spiral of black stone, etched with shifting glyphs that rearranged themselves when viewed from the corner of the eye, an architecture of resonance designed to focus the awakening frequencies, to amplify the final song. This was the signal's heart. Kaelen's knees buckled as he stepped closer, the gravity of the place pressing down on him like an invisible ocean. His vision blurred, bleeding into colors and patterns that should not exist. Memories not his own flooded his mind, memories of worlds long dead, of cities made from songs, of endless voids filled with choruses of beings so vast that stars burned out in their wake. He saw humanity's place in the vast symphony, a single, trembling note in a song spanning eons, desperately trying to rise above the roar of entropy. And he understood, Lina's awakening was not just about survival. It was about joining that greater music, becoming part of the eternal choir that shaped and remade the cosmos. But to do so, they had to pass through the crucible. They had to survive the scavengers, the silences, the devouring darkness that always followed the song. Kaelen reached out, his hand brushing against the living stone of the spiral. It vibrated under his touch, singing a low, mournful tone that resonated through his bones, unlocking memories sealed deep within the bloodlines of his ancestors, visions of first contact, of worlds that sang and fell, of choices made and prices paid. He stumbled back, gasping, tears streaming down his face without his permission. It was too much, too vast, too beautiful and too terrible to hold. Lina placed her hand atop his, her fingers light but anchoring, and he felt the song stabilize, narrowing from an endless roar into a single, clear thread that he could follow. She smiled, a small, sad smile that carried the weight of all the worlds they had never seen, and without a word, she stepped forward into the spiral. The structure responded instantly. The glyphs flared with cold light, spinning faster, folding inward. The ground rumbled, and the very air seemed to crackle with the tension of creation poised on the brink of decision. Lina's voice rose again, soft at first, then stronger, threading into the spiral's resonance, weaving new layers into the ancient song, shaping it with the raw, desperate will of humanity's first true act of defiance against the silence of oblivion. And the heart answered. The spiral split open along invisible seams, revealing a stairway that descended into darkness so deep it seemed to swallow sound and light alike. A gateway to the true core, the place where the seeders had left their final test, their final gift or their final judgment. Kaelen hesitated only a moment before following Lina into the abyss. As they descended, the walls around them shimmered and bled into visions, fractured memories of other journeys, other awakenings, other species that had risen and fallen before them. Some had succeeded, ascending into forms of life so transcendent Kaelen's mind recoiled from the images. Most had failed, their songs silenced, their worlds reduced to barren husks drifting forever in the cold dark. The stairway twisted and warped, folding back upon itself in impossible geometries, and the air grew colder, denser, until every breath felt like inhaling liquid stone. Lina's song was the only light, a fragile thread of sound guiding them downward, deeper into the marrow of the earth, into the marrow of creation itself. At the bottom, they found a door not of metal or stone, but of pure resonance, a barrier woven from frozen frequencies, each strand vibrating with the tension of 1,000 forgotten hopes. It pulsed slowly, waiting. Kaelen knew without being told, only Lina could open it. Only her song, pure and complete, could unlock the heart. And behind that door, the truth of humanity's future waited, patient, terrible, inevitable. The resonance door shivered as Lina approached, its surface rippling with colors that did not exist in any earthly spectrum, like a wound stitched into reality by hands that had long since abandoned flesh. Her song softer now, almost a whisper threaded into the frozen frequencies, searching, probing, until the strands began to unravel, peeling back layer after layer with agonizing slowness. Kaelen stood behind her, every muscle locked rigid, his senses overwhelmed by the sheer density of presence gathering around them. It felt as if the entire universe was leaning closer, holding its breath. When the final thread snapped, it was not a sound that escaped, but a pressure, an invisible shock wave that slammed into Kaelen's chest, driving him back a step, making his vision blur with a cascade of impossible shapes and memories not his own. The door dissolved into a rain of light, revealing a chamber beyond that defied architecture, defied physics, defied understanding. The seed chamber was vast beyond reason, a cavern woven not from stone but from living resonance, its walls a swirling mass of frequencies singing to each other across impossible distances. Towers of crystallized thought spiraled upward into darkness, each structure pulsing with a heartbeat that resonated deep in the bones. Rivers of liquid light flowed through the air in languid arcs, shifting in colors that spoke of concepts Kaelen's mind could barely grasp: birth, death, creation, annihilation, all entwined into a single endless cycle. And at the center of it all stood the heart core, a monolith so ancient, so saturated with layered codes and dormant symphonies, that its mere presence distorted the fabric of time around it. It pulsed slowly, waiting. Lina stepped forward, drawn inexorably toward the core, her small frame dwarfed by the enormity of the chamber, her white dress glowing like a candle against the black ocean of forgotten dreams. Kaelen followed, every instinct screaming that this place was not meant for mortals, that to enter was to be unmade and remade in ways the soul might not survive. But there was no turning back now. As Lina approached the core, it responded, the surface blooming open like a colossal flower carved from sound, revealing within a vortex of raw, seething energy a map, a weapon, a seed, all in one. The final gift of the seeders. Kaelen staggered as visions assaulted him, Earth itself laid bare, stripped of its illusions, revealed as one node among countless others scattered through the galactic web, humanity, a symphony still unfinished, a precarious note trembling on the edge of either ascension or annihilation, the scavengers, vast and merciless, drawn by the song like wolves to wounded prey, racing toward Earth even now across the black oceans between stars. And the choice. Always the choice. The seed chamber was not a sanctuary. It was a forge. It would either complete the awakening, binding humanity into the cosmic choir, or burn them away as an aborted song unworthy of survival. The core offered no promises, no mercy. Only the terrible, beautiful truth that survival required transformation. Required sacrifice. Lina turned to Kaelen, her eyes vast and ancient, burning with the light of 1,000 dead civilizations. Her voice, when it came, was not spoken aloud, but resonated directly into his mind. You must choose with me. The heart will not open for one voice alone. Only together. Kaelen's heart twisted. Fear surged in his veins, hot and bitter, but beneath it was something stronger, something older. The instinct to protect, to believe, to reach beyond fear and grasp hope even when it meant standing naked before the abyss. He stepped forward, laying his hand beside Lina's on the core. The chamber responded with a roar of resonance so deep it shook the very threads of existence. The rivers of light exploded into spiraling maelstroms, the towers of crystal shattered and reformed into new geometries, and the chamber itself began to collapse inward, folding into a singularity of sound and light. Kaelen screamed, not from pain, but from the unbearable beauty of it, the overwhelming realization that he was not merely witnessing the birth of a new humanity, he was becoming it. Lina's song rose higher, piercing the heavens, threading through the broken sky, sending a pulse of pure creation outward across the wounded world. The scavengers, so close now, recoiled as the song struck them, burning away the corruption of silence with the raw fire of living sound. For a moment, just a moment, Earth sang. Not in words, not in cries of war or sorrow, but in a true, pure note of becoming, a note that rippled outward into the void, announcing to the universe that this world had not fallen, had not been silenced, had not surrendered. As the seed chamber collapsed into itself, as reality stitched new patterns from the broken threads, Kaelen felt Lina's hand tighten around his, anchoring him against the maelstrom, against the fear. Together, they had chosen. Together, they had answered the call. And the universe was listening. The world did not end. It was reborn, fractured, trembling, raw but undeniably alive. The pulse that had radiated from the collapse of the seed chamber had not destroyed the earth, though for a moment, every atom had sung with the unbearable tension of that possibility. Instead, it had rewritten the world's foundations, stitching new patterns into the fabric of existence with a precision that defied the crude languages of physics and faith alike. Kaelen and Lina emerged from the ruins of the chamber into a sky bruised purple and gold, where stars hung closer and brighter than they had any right to be, their light tangled with faint, singing threads that only those newly awakened could hear. The land around them was unfamiliar, vast fields of glassy vegetation that shifted colors with the touch of wind, rivers of liquid darkness reflecting constellations unseen by human eyes, mountains that breathed slowly like sleeping giants under cloaks of mist. Life had not only survived, it had evolved. Yet the beauty of it was tempered by a deep, aching sorrow, an echo of the cost that had been exacted. Entire cities had vanished, swallowed by folds in reality where time ran crooked and sideways. Entire forests had twisted into labyrinths of impossible geometry, their trees sprouting crystalline limbs that whispered forgotten names into the shifting air. Humanity had not passed through the awakening unscathed. Only those whose minds and blood had resonated with the cedar song had endured the full transition. The rest had either perished in a storm of collapsed certainty or had become something, else. Kaelen and Lina moved carefully through this new world, their senses flooded by sights and sounds too vast for words. Every breath Kaelen took was thick with meaning, every step felt like walking on the thin skin of a dream half remembered and half feared. Lina, ever silent now, radiated a calm that was not human calm but something deeper, a serenity drawn from an understanding Kaelen could only glimpse when he dared look into her shining eyes. It was Lina who first sensed them, the others, the first of the awakened. They came slowly across the shifting plains, figures draped in robes woven from living light, their faces marked not by features but by complex sigils that shifted and flowed like living equations. They moved with purpose, yet without urgency, as if time itself bent to their will. These were the new bearers of the Seeders' legacy, the inheritors of the code woven into the bones of the earth. And they had come for Lina. Kaelen tensed instinctively, ready to shield her, to fight, to flee if necessary, but Lina touched his arm lightly, her small hand radiating a warmth that stilled his heart. She stepped forward to meet them, and the awakened bowed not out of submission, but out of recognition. She was the resonant child, the one who had completed the song, who had carried the burden of awakening across the brink of extinction and into the uncertain light of a new age. One of the awakened tall, their voice a symphony of overlapping tones, spoke directly into Kaelen's mind, bypassing language entirely. The Seeders left their legacy in flesh and song. You have preserved it? But now, it must be cultivated. The earth is no longer a silent world. It is a voice newly born into the choir of the cosmos. Kaelen staggered under the weight of that truth. The battle was not over. It had only shifted to a new plane. Humanity was no longer alone, no longer unseen, no longer insignificant. Their song had been heard across the deep black oceans, and with it came the promise of communion or the threat of consumption. The scavengers were not yet defeated. They circled still, waiting for weakness, for faltering notes. Lina's eyes met his, and in that look was the unspoken vow, they would not falter. The awakened guided them toward a city that had not been built but grown, an intricate lattice of crystal and living stone, pulsing with the rhythms of new life. It was not a place of dominance or conquest, but a sanctuary for those who had survived the transition, a nexus where humanity would begin the long, agonizing process of learning to live as more than what they had been. As they approached, Kaelen saw children laughing amid strange gardens that sang when touched, saw old men and women weeping openly at the simple act of breathing a world reborn, saw animals, some familiar, some utterly alien, moving together without fear. It was a beginning, fragile and trembling, but real. Yet in the distance, where the mountains bled into the dark edges of the sky, Kaelen could feel it, the cold, patient hunger of the scavengers lingering beyond sight, waiting for the first cracks to appear, for the first notes of discord to break the fragile harmony. The legacy of the Seeders was not a guarantee of salvation. It was an invitation to rise, to fail, to sing a new song, or to fall silent once more. Kaelen tightened his grip on Lina's hand, feeling the low thrum of power still coursing through her small frame, and together they stepped into the light of the new world, carrying with them the fragile, terrible hope that humanity might, this time, be worthy of the song they had been given. The city of living stone pulsed beneath a sky fractured into 1,000 swirling hues, each color singing its own mournful note into the wounded night. Lina stood at the apex of a vast crystalline platform, her figure small against the sprawling tapestry of the reborn world, yet shining with a light that no shadow could extinguish. Around her, the awakened gathered, silent and expectant, their forms half lit by the strange auroras that now stained the heavens with shifting veils of silver and violet. Beyond the city's edge, the dark mountains loomed like broken teeth, and somewhere deep within their depths, the scavengers still watched, waiting for weakness. Kaelen stood just behind Lina, his heart tight, thrumming not of fear and awe. He could feel the tremors in the air, the electric crackle of potential coiled so tightly that it threatened to tear the very fabric of reality asunder. This was the moment everything had led to, the choice the Seeders had left sleeping inside humanity's blood, the choice Lina had awakened with her impossible voice. And now, that choice had to be made real. Lina raised her hands slowly, her fingers weaving delicate patterns in the charged air, and as she did, the ground beneath her feet began to vibrate with a low, resonant hum, deep and ancient, a sound that spoke not to the ears but to the bones, the blood, the forgotten architecture of life itself. The remnants of the old world machines, cities, towers of broken glass and steel shivered and moaned under the pressure of the new frequencies. The rivers changed course, carving glowing veins across the land, pulsing with a rhythm that no human architect could have planned. Flora mutated in real time, blossoming into forms that seemed to shimmer between dimensions, half in this world and half in another. But even as the song of renewal rose, Kaelen sensed the fracture points forming tiny pockets of resistance buried deep in the hearts of those who had survived the transition but had not accepted it. In the distance, faint and raw, he felt the echoes of rage, fear, and grief. Not all humans were willing to become something new. Some clung desperately to the ashes of the old world, to the known misery rather than face the terror of an unknown ascent. And those who clung too tightly would become anchors, dragging the newborn melody back into silence if left unchecked. The scavengers felt it too. Their presence thickened at the edges of perception, immense, predatory forms moving between layers of reality, their hunger sharpened by the scent of a song struggling to find its final note. They could not create, only devour. They had no melodies of their own. They fed on the songs of others, on worlds that faltered before their own fear. Lina's voice rose higher, weaving a new melody into existence, and for a moment Kaelen saw it, the true earth, not as it had been, but as it could be. A world where consciousness bloomed like forests across the stars, where life sang itself into endless renewal, where death was not an end but a gateway to deeper harmonies. A world free from the entropy that gnawed at all things born of silence and ignorance. But the new song required sacrifice. Kaelen understood now, not everyone could come through. The song demanded unity, resonance. Those who refused would fall away, not by violence, but by their own dissonance, unable to hold shape in the new pattern being woven. He saw the first of them crumble at the city's edge, figures who screamed against the coming dawn, their forms breaking apart into ash and fading echoes, swallowed by the very frequencies they rejected. It was not cruelty. It was law, written deeper than flesh, deeper than time. Kaelen's heart broke even as it hardened. He stepped forward, his voice trembling but sure, joining Lina's in the great chord rising from the earth. Others followed, awakened, old and young, human and almost human, adding their notes to the rising symphony. The song grew, a living force pushing outward from the city in expanding waves, weaving new threads into the wounded fabric of the world. And as it spread, the scavengers shrieked in rage, recoiling from the light, from the sound, from the unbearable proof that life, once truly awakened, could not be devoured. Above them, the stars answered. A single pulse, a tone older than memory, shuddered through the sky, and for a moment the universe seemed to lean closer, listening. Across the black oceans between galaxies, something else stirred. An answering note. Not from the Seeders. Not from the scavengers. From another. Another voice. Another world. Another people, long silent, now hearing Earth's newborn song and reaching out with cautious, trembling hands across the void. Kaelen fell to his knees, overcome by the enormity of it, tears streaming down his face as Lina's voice soared into the heavens, threading into that distant answering note, weaving the beginnings of a new bridge between worlds. The song was unfinished. It would take generations to complete. But it had begun. And in its trembling, fragile notes, Kaelen heard not an ending, but a promise that life, once it truly found its voice, would never be silenced again. The song has been sung, the earth reborn in echoes of a truth long buried. We were never alone, we were always a verse in an unfinished chorus waiting to rise. But as humanity steps into this terrifying and beautiful new beginning, the question remains. Would you have chosen to awaken, knowing the price? Would you fight to preserve the old world or embrace the unknown symphony waiting beyond the stars? Share with us what moment in Lina's journey moved you the most. If you were standing beside her, at the seed chamber, what choice would you have made? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story sparks something within you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join the alien Storyverse where every story is a step closer to the mysteries that still wait beyond the sky.